G, staff will be on their way to check on it. You have actually a handout in front of you, and then it's also already uploaded in Simply, which is the first. So I would, if you aren't on Simply, you may want to go ahead. As you can tell, Jonathan is starting our morning off.
I feel better already.
I won't repeat myself, but yesterday I think we hung in there very well considering the amount of time we were together and the amount of information we took in. Today is going to prove to be just as long and just as much information. So Roxy does not have a rubber band.
I know I need one.
But I think it's fine. We all did well yesterday. And just remember, we always have our attorney here to remind us. Oh, yeah, you need the one? So I think we can try to start even though they will be working.
A couple of things I'd like to share with the board. I want to look at the agenda and just talk you through the components first. This is going to be a deep dive on K-3, the legislation that was going to require us to reduce class sizes. You've had some information presented in the fall. That information was good. It was a starting point. But we're going to walk through today the law itself, and your attorney is going to talk about that. Also going to talk about requirements for DPI, because the law also has that stipulation that DPI will develop procedures to implement. So they've done that through the Student Accounting Manual. Then we're going to, as yesterday, we're going to give you some data. And this may be a bit of a challenge because this is going to be the first time you've seen this data. You saw yesterday's data to some degree prior to. And so trying to get all of this information to the point that it is concise and meaningful takes a lot of time. Rather than drown you in data, I think a lot of good work has been done. We'll start with the facilities and space component. We're going to give you a snapshot of facilities. We audited, thanks to the principals and the area superintendents, the use of space in every elementary school. That was done last month. And so that is a snapshot, and I would have to share with you that snapshot is likely to change next year. You won't change the square footage in the building. You won't change where the walls are. But principals likely change the usage year to year, which impacts capacity numbers. And so the way I think about capacity, and I know y'all have thoughts about that as well, is I look at it more like I do Title I. You set a stake, a time in the year when you establish Title I numbers. And then after that, throughout the year, they go up and down. There's a change. And so there's always a change if you take a snapshot at different points, but you have to have one place that you start from. So for this purpose, this is the snapshot. It will likely be different in the future. So I want you to know that. Then we're going to look at the same thing, a projected snapshot. And Joe will walk you through how we're using next year's data and the law and the requirements of the law to see what the difference may be between the current snapshot and the projected snapshot. Again, if you can do as you did yesterday and substantially hold your questions till the end, that would be great. Let us get that out.
That'll be difficult.
Yes, sir.
As always.
I know, but you did a great job yesterday. And sometimes you just need to clarify and appreciate how you handled it yesterday. Then we're going to move to allotments and the funding impact. And there is an impact there. There's a cost there. There's some things that we need to think about. Question and answer after that. Then staffing and recruitment. What do we need? How many more teachers will we need? How will we get them? What does that look like compared to what we normally need? After that, then will be the part that I'm going to ask. This is where I'm asking you to share your thoughts. We will have presented some options, some scenarios. You can do this, you can do that. I'm not going to ask you to make any decisions today, not to vote on anything. But what I want is to hear your thoughts, your reaction, your opinions related to some of the options for facilities and space, allotments and funding, and staffing to inform my work with staff to develop a recommendation to bring to you. we've got to have something on the table as to how you're going to address this next year. It won't be complete, but right now we really don't have a way for staff to implement this and for the board to know what that implementation plan is. And I would prefer that the board approve it. So the goal is, if we can get through this, we have dedicated time, and I don't know if we will make this. There's a placeholder on the agenda for next Tuesday for a recommendation to be presented to the board as information only. So you won't be asked to vote on it. As information only, with the goal of having you at the next meeting, I believe that's April 10th, to actually decide if that's where you want to go. That lets it sit on the table. You can think about it. You can listen to feedback and figure out this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. And let me assure you, my goal isn't to put something on the table that I'm willing to stand for regardless in terms of this is the way it has to be. We've got to start. The only way I know to help you is to put a recommendation on the table, our best recommendation, and let you take it from there. So that's the process for today. This is going to be a conversation, and it will be a bit of a challenge, especially as we talk about prioritization of some of the options. And again, I wish we'd had more information sooner. Staff has really, really worked hard, and I'm very impressed. In a pretty short period of time, we've gone from a good amount of data and information to, I think, is much, much more, and now condensed it so that it can be shared with you. I'm really proud of the work staff has done, and principals have done an awful lot to help as well. They had to dedicate a lot of time for the audit of the space, and we'll continue to get feedback from them.
In terms of the recommendations, when we get to those,
yes,
is the only people that have seen that is staff and you so far. Is that correct?
Yes, in terms of scenarios. There's no recommendation.
I'm sorry. All right, scenarios.
Yeah, and it's not even a scenario as much as here's some options. What do y'all think about this?
Okay.
What do you think about that? What am I looking for? I want to hear you. We discussed maybe doing some activity or protocol. I don't want to do it that way for this. I want to just have you talk about it so that we can, you can do that. So that puts pressure on your board chair.
What makes you think that, Kathy?
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No, it does.
I do think that this is a time to converse. This is the first time you've seen it. I don't want you feeling like you have to stake yourself out and put dots on things. Not now.
Not yet.
We may choose something later. And I wanted you to understand what I am looking for is this is your chance to talk on the front end, to give feedback. Otherwise, what I do not want to do is to bring you something and say, here it is, now react to it without hearing your discussion, your thought about it.
So some guidance.
I want to know what the board thinks before I get to the point, we get to the point that we have a recommendation to put. And so that will be helpful. Then we'll move to the budget development update. This may look in many ways very much like the update you received in January. Just want to stay on process, let you know where we are as we're moving forward. Some discussion, we'll look at the process, the budget drivers, answer questions. We are in process. The goal is to bring you a superintendent's recommended budget on April 10th. And so we're moving down that path as well. And again, no decision. We just want to let you know where we are in the process.
I'm not home. Sorry.
But any questions about what's hoped for today?
It reminds us all to go to our phones.
We've got a lot of work to do today.
We have a lot of work, and this is, as you're going to see as well, the K-3 class size legislation has a lot of legs, and they go lots of places, and they never stop moving. This is hard to grab. In a district with Wake's complexity, this overlay is very, very complex. And it has impact on the budget, on the bond, and I know that you're aware of that. And that's why this is necessary moving into budget and the bond development. Okay, did I do okay with that?
Yes.
Pretty good?
Understandable.
Madam
Pretty
Chair? Good?
Yes, Jonathan, before you start with note, Dr. Martin actually reminded me, and he's not here, he won't be here at 10, but to remind us that today we've given, I believe, great instructions and support to our schools for those schools and students who choose to walk out for the 17 minutes in support of the 17 students who died in a horrific incident literally a month ago today. And so my 12-year-old gave me this little ribbon acknowledging the work that our students are doing. And for those of you who are interested in social media, I'm very proud of the instructions our students have given their peers around the meaning of today and what it's not to be used for. And the fact that they're also openly supporting students who choose not to do that. So I think we have a lot to be proud of from the district and the way that we've supported our schools, but most importantly, the way our students are actually holding each other accountable for their actions today. So that makes me extremely proud as a parent and as a school board member, and quite frankly, as a community member. We heard our 2 students last board meeting that I was extremely proud of in the 7th grade. So just a reminder for those of us, hopefully, if it's silent in here at 10, we will know that all goes well, since the leadership is in this room. And by leadership, I mean not me, I mean the district leadership. And thank you very much, Jonathan, for your lawyering.
Well, can I thank back just
Absolutely.
for, I'm honored to have served the district for some 30 years now. As I sit in the room now, and I know pretty much everybody in here, I feel the dedication to public education and to the students and to Wake County. And I felt that for a long time, and I'm appreciative of this opportunity just to talk today, but to continue to serve you all. As I talk about my 30 years, I will say that class size legislation has actually been around about that entire time. What has happened is that it started from a point of great flexibility, and then all of a sudden, with the change in the statute that suddenly put hard, rigid rules in place that set specific limits, then all of a sudden the flexibility went out the window and the panic hit. And so the panic hit, and it was supposed to go into effect for 17-18 of this school year. And then the next piece that came into it was House Bill 13, which gave us sort of a 1-year somewhat reprieve from the hard rules. And so that's sort of the next step in the quick history. And then the next piece that came was House Bill 90. And so we're going to talk about, and that provides sort of a gradual, phase-in of the hard rules. But the hard rules will hit in 21 and 22. And so that's sort of where we are. And that's the quick history, from some flexibility to some dire rigidity that created a great deal of panic to a phase-in of that rigidity. And that's the short version on class size. So I'm done now.
Nice try.
Okay, so with class size, that is the statute 115C301. These are the 3 areas that are covered by that law. And again, this is the law that is now being phased in, but that's the statute. What are average maximums that are set by the statute? What are maximums for individual classes? And then what is the whole approach to us having to be able to report to the Department of Public Instruction, to the state, our class size, and what about if we can't meet those class sizes in a particular class or in our averages, what is that waiver process? And of course that does build in some penalties if we're not able to do so. Okay, so House Bill 90, again, that's the most recent part of the class size history. Passed on February 13th. Governor Cooper has indicated that he is neither going to sign it nor veto it, so it should become law. And again,
the actual date of that.
What's that? It's supposed to be, when I talked to Leanne at the School Boards Association, she said 30 days. So, I mean, 30 days from February 13th, so we're there.
We're there, okay.
Yeah. So again, House Bill 90, we've got the phase-ins of the rigid class size restrictions little by little until we hit 21, 22, and then the hard rules go into effect. It does provide for some added funding for enhancement teachers, or some funding for enhancement teachers, and that was sort of the great worry, one of the great worries that happened when, again, sort of the hard, rigid rules went into effect. I know there was panic around facilities. That still hasn't been addressed. So there's nothing that I'm going to say today that's going to create any relief on the facility side. But that one of the problems with the hard rules was around enhancement teachers, that as the rigid rules come into a place where your funding for positions and your class size have to match, there's no more play in the system, there's no more added money to be able to hire enhancement teachers under the hard rules. When that goes into effect, how are we going to hire? Where's the money going to come from for enhancement teachers? And so House Bill 90, and we'll get into it a little bit more, does create some funding, some phased-in funding for enhancement teachers. And then the other piece that House Bill 90 does is it exempts enhancement classes from the individual class size requirements. So, one of the worries was, well, does a PE class have to meet these rigid rules? Does an art class? Does a music class? Do they have to meet the rigid class size rules? And what we were having to do was to seek essentially waivers this year to be able to get for those classes. And what the statute comes in and says, from now moving forward, your enhancement teachers, the individual class size rules don't apply at all to those. So that's also an added benefit. All right, so if you like to see it in image form, this is what it looks like now. I know you've seen this in various forms. You saw it with House Bill 13, but this is what it looks like in terms of your phase-in. This year, it's district average 20 with individual classes up to 23. Same for next year. And then the class sizes are going to drop a year each year, and then leading into 21-22, where you have the hard rules. And the hard rules of 2021-22, that is what is in the statute of 115C301. That's what came and hit and caused the panic, because it was going to hit right away. It was going to hit this year. And now we've gotten, like I said, some gradual relief, but that ultimately everything is in place 21-22. And again, still no relief on the facilities front. So this is just a narrative of what's in the chart on class sizes, the gradual phase in towards 21-22, explaining that. And again, it's 18 for kindergarten, 16 for first grade, and then 17 for second and third grade as we get to that point. Similarly, this is, again, just from the chart, again, in a narrative form. Okay, so how do you calculate the average class size? How are we going to go about doing that calculation? And Dr. Burns noted that sort of the DPI guidance forms sort of the interpretation, the implementation guidance for the statute. This really hasn't been changed by House Bill 90. This is what's been in effect. And you're going to look at K3, you're going to look at the, your classes that have language arts, which is going to be basically your reading classes. Those are the classes that are going to count as you go about trying to calculate your average class sizes. So your enhancement classes, they wouldn't count. They're not going to be, sort of your language arts classes. Unfortunately, if you look in that second bullet, it says they exclude EC classes, exceptional children's classes. Well, that's disadvantageous to us, right? We would like to include classes in the average that tend to be smaller. And we have fought that, and we hope to continue to fight that in terms of DPI's guidance on that. If they're teaching language arts, why do you just take out the EC classes? Again, if we can bring our averages down, it gives us added flexibility. So that's one. And then also, the classes also exclude for the averages. They're not going to look at when we're dealing with pull-out teachers or teachers who work with select students. Again, it would be helpful if, pull-out class, if we could use those as well, because those would bring bring down our averages and make it easier for us to meet the limits. But those have not been included. The dual language immersion classes, they are exempt. So those are not part of, when you're looking at the averages, they're not going to include the dual language immersion classes. And that's literally part of the statute. So those are classes that are taught at least 50% of the time that they're taught in a foreign language. And at least a third of the students in there, their dominant language is English. So that's what your dual language immersion.
That's a set class.
That's a class
with a teacher.
With a teacher, and then you do not basically
not movement in and out of that. Typically, I mean, for other than support services, perhaps.
To the best of my knowledge, that is a class. I haven't had the question about it's a moving, rotating thing. It's a class. It's a dual immersion class. Kathy, if you want to speak to it, that's my understanding.
They receive either all their core instruction or half their core instruction, depending on how it's done in the target language. So it's the teacher of record for that number of students.
Okay. All right.
Right. Would not be included for purposes of our averages. So that's where we are on averages, and if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to move to the individuals. So for individual class sizes, again, this is also just sort of a narrative of the chart that we had, where it breaks it down. This is the phase-in to the hard, rigid rules in 21-22.
So that first bullet, on the second month of school,
Yeah.
if 23 is the max, we can't have a class more than 22.
No, you can't
It
have.
has to be under the maximum.
No, so it would no. You can go up to 23.
Okay.
Cannot go to 24.
You cannot go to 24.
Okay, so each individual class must be under. Okay, I read it wrong.
Must be equal to it.
I do that
Yeah,
frequently.
that's a great point.
Good
Yeah.
point out.
So you see the phase in.
And I want to highlight something with the first bullet too. The law says after the second month of school, at no time shall a class exceed. That's what the legislation says.
Yep.
Practically, from a process point of view, we're going to talk about that, but the legislation is very clear. At no time shall the class exceed the requirements of the statute.
So you have 23 in all of your classes and one kid shows up.
Well, then we have a process.
Okay.
The procedures contemplate the fact that when the kid shows up, you have to take action. You can't fix it immediately. But the law says at no time shall. So there's a bit of a disconnect there.
There is.
And it's okay. We will have a process to help you with that.
Are you saying that it also covers the first 2 months of the school year, or only from the end of the second month to the end of the school year?
This is what the statute says. At the end of the second school month and for the remainder of the school year, the size of an individual class in kindergarten through 3 shall not exceed the allotment ratio by more than 3 students. And so those would be the limits. So if there's a problem in the first month, it's not a violation.
So I was just responding to at no time.
After the second.
At no time after the second month.
And then
Yeah, that gives us time
It does.
exactly.
to respond to
On the front end,
the.
after that second month, there's a different process that comes into play.
Right. It's not an automatic zap.
No.
If you exceed, there's a process, as Dr. Burns stated, and we'll go through that. But it's not there's just a process to seek a waiver and more funding.
And is the time for the days the school is open, or the times that students have received instruction? Multi-track schools.
Yeah, that's
So is it second month after
Calendar. It's the school
if it
calendar.
opens on July 10, second month, regardless of
track.
whether all the
Right,
students
right.
have been in the building for 60 days or not?
It's not
Yeah.
been tracked.
The truth is, and that's correct, the truth is that your reporting is going to start in October. That's when you're going to do your first one. But if a teacher does find out, we'll talk about that the class exceeds the limits, they're supposed to report to the principal and superintendent.
Okay. All right. Just
Go on up from there. Again, more just, restating what's in the chart. Charts you can put so much more information in, but wanted to note the maximums. All right, so now let's talk a little bit more about the exceptions. And just for a second, I want to just make sure we understand the difference between an exception to the individual class size rules and waivers. So exceptions are basically that the class itself is exempt from the from the limits. It can exceed the class size limits, and so of course, charter schools, they're exempt. Your restart schools, that they're exempt. We talked about, and we talked about some others, but the main new one is the program enhancement classes, that those are now exempt. And so you see the definition there, and this is part of HB 90. I mean, this again is one of the advantages of the new statute. It specifically exempts program enhancement classes from the class size limits, and you see the definitions there. So again, an exemption, we are not in a situation where we have to apply for any waiver or seek any relief from the state. We're automatically okay. So let's just talk a little bit more about the other big advantage of HB 90, and that's the added fund or the funding for your program enhancement teachers. And you'll see that it's designed to be that you would get one program enhancement teacher for every 191 students at the K through 5 level. And there's a phase-in funding on it. So for the 18-19, you'd get 25% of the full funding, and then you'll see here as it will go up so that when you hit the 21-22 school year, that you would then get full funding for your enhancement teachers at that ratio of one enhancement teachers K-5 for 191 students. Yes?
This is a Kathy question. Is this 1 to 91 significantly different than how Wake County has?
So we'll get to that.
We'll get to that, it is.
Part of it is different.
Like how we've done it in the past.
It is different.
Okay.
That's part of the allotment discussion.
Yes. Okay. We'll wait.
But the law would not prohibit these people serving pre-K as well. The allocation is based on K-5, but it doesn't limit
how we would use that. I do not know the answer to that. I'm not aware that it creates that limit. It's just this is how.
I mean, there wouldn't be, but a few of the little munchkins and.
Right.
All right.
They're very good question. So I just want to. So do you guys sort of see where the General Assembly is thinking on this? Why they're phasing in? The payment. I mean, we'd prefer, of course, that they gave us 100% next year for it. But basically, I think in the General Assembly's eyes, what they're saying is that we're still funding you over these next couple of years at a rate that's better than what you have to meet at your averages. So there should be, in their eyes, some added funding for you to be able to have enhancement teachers. But by the time you hit the rigid point of 21-22, none of that money will exist. It will all have to go to those, K through 3 regular ed teachers, and so boom, you have no more play money to be able to fund enhancement teachers.
Jonathan.
Yeah, extra money, additional money.
Flexibility.
Flexibility. Good. Better word. Better word. Better word. Thank you.
I'm not tweeting them.
Thank you. Don't tweet play money. Appreciate it. All right, reporting requirements. Any further questions on that before we go to that? Okay.
No, that was not a bad thing to have said.
Okay. Reporting requirements. Reporting requirements. So biannual reports that, as we were stating, that while there's an ongoing requirement after the second month to meet the limits, that what you have here is when the requirements, when you actually have to do the reporting, and that's in October and February. Does note that the DPI will do some audits. Did they do any audits this year, to y'all's knowledge? I'm not familiar. Okay.
They've got most of the data in Power School, how they scrub it. So.
Yep. And this was basically existing reporting requirements in 115C301. It was not part of House Bill 90, so this is unchanged by it. Same with this, and district has received sort of charts and forms on how to do this, but this is what's in the reports that need to be presented in those 2 months, in October and then February of each year. do have to list where the exceptions are, but that's where it is. And again, these are the reporting requirements. So then we talked about waivers, and remember, waivers are different from the exceptions. The waivers are when actually there's an overage and you need to seek some relief from it. And one of the things that I just wanted to sort of stress there is that when you seek the relief from it, you have some grounds on which you can actually apply for a waiver, but you can also seek, additional funding. And this is sort of what Dr. Burns was indicating previously, that it's not an automatic violation with penalties that would apply, that first you would go through this process. So we report it out, and then within 45 days of the receipt, the state board's going to decide, are they going to give us additional funding or a waiver? And then once we have received notice on that, we have to make the correction. So, and here's the grounds for the waivers. They're very limited. Acts of God, emergencies, and an unanticipated increase at a school at suddenly 2% of the ADM at the school. There's a charter school closing, the organizational problems in geographically isolated areas. I mean, that's when you're really dealing with a very rural situation where you have essentially, less than 1.5 students per square mile. So those are going to be very limited situations where you're going to be able to get a waiver. If our request for added funding or for a waiver, because we're over, is denied, then basically we have to. We are at the point where we're going to have to fix it, and if we don't fix it, then the penalty can kick in. Part of the reporting does require that the superintendent work on an affidavit. We have worked on that. We provided some feedback to DPI to make it at least a more tolerable affidavit that doesn't make it sound like the superintendent went in and did every count in every class in every school. That it understood that the superintendent is relying on information provided by others. And if the state board determines doesn't provide us the funding, the added funding, doesn't grant the waiver, and then we're unable to fix it after they come back and check on it 60 days later. So it says, within 60 days of notification, we have to provide an updated report. And if we were unable to fix it during that time, then the state can withhold the superintendent's salary, the amount that the state's giving us. Of course, it says we're still responsible for honoring the superintendent's contract. It's just we would not have that money. So that's the enforcement. There is a different statute also that applies, and this is 115C47 lists the duties of the Board of Education. So here, and there's all kinds of powers and duties for the board. This particular statute at 10 then talks about class size as it is the board's responsibility. And if you'll note there, places responsibility on local boards to provide adequate number of classrooms to meet the requirements of the statute. Again, we have not gotten any facilities relief at all in House Bill 90 or in any of the statutes relating to class size. There is talk about a potential state bond that could provide some relief across the state. Talked with, again, the lobbyists for the School Boards Association that's perhaps something that could be considered, and obviously that would be a wonderful thing in terms of adding funding for some facilities. But right now we have no relief on the funding. So looking at the third bullet here, I just want to stress. So what happens? That there is a responsibility to report straight up the chain of command if we have an overage. And so the teacher determines that the class is outside the class size limits, that must report it to the principal and the superintendent. The superintendent immediately has to see whether, in fact, there is an overage. So there is a calculation that needs to be done. If there is an overage, then it needs to report it to the board at the next meeting. So this is a fairly tight kind of process with a fair amount of urgency on it. And then the board shall take action, to meet the requirements when it gets to the board or apply to the state for a waiver or for additional funding. And we've talked about that process then already. It goes to the state, and then they're going to let you know whether they're going to give you more money for it or they're going to grant a waiver. And if they don't, then we go through the process of we either can fix it, or if we don't fix it, then they can pull the superintendent's pay. And so that's how it all works. It does sort of cover the district in terms of, everybody's got pretty much a role in from the teacher to the principal to the superintendent to the board in trying to meet these requirements. So just here's just a summary of the latest chapter in class size. Again, it has been around a while, and there was flexibility, then there was rigidity, and now we have a phase-in. And so that's the large phase-in. That the second bullet there again is the exemption for enhancement classes from the individual class size mandates, and that's part of House Bill 90. That's new. The additional funding that will come for enhancement teachers in K through 5, and then the reporting requirements and the waiver requirements, that has not changed by House Bill 90, and the enforcement, if we have overages, that has not been changed by House Bill 90. So that's sort of an overview of the parameters, the legal parameters, the history and the legal parameters. Was designed to be sort of a springboard for your discussions, because I think implementation, the law has changed a lot, but I think at this point it's fairly coherent about what the law means. I think the challenge is in the implementation, and so I appreciate Dr. Burns wanting me to sort of set the table for you all to talk about the more difficult processes of how can districts implement it. But I'm happy to field any questions about the legal side on class size.
And before you ask questions, if I could add 2 process points. And Jonathan, thanks. That's a really great high-level overview of something that's really complicated.
Appreciate it.
During the first 20 days, we do have flexibility for classes to be outside of the limit, as long as the district average doesn't exceed the requirement.
That's still
So you can have some up and some down during the first 2 months, but the average has to be within the limit. So that's kind of a false horizon if you think about it. You still have to monitor. You still have to be on top of it. The other part, when the slide was shown with the responsibilities of teachers, principals, superintendents, and the board, the idea that the board will take action to correct it. I'm sure you know this, but I want to remind you that you have already in your budget reserved a pool of months of employment. And this year, especially, when a class exceeded, there was a process, and I'm sure Ms. Moore will talk more about this, whereby the principal notifies the area superintendent. An allotment is established. Now there's a position for the remainder of the year. Position is posted, someone hired, and the requirement is met. Well, in small districts, the reason this addresses the board, it is not typical that the superintendent has the authority to create a position without coming to the board. It has to request the board create a position. It happens in some cases, but in most cases, in my experience, it does not. And so for efficiency, what you're doing now works. If it sounds like you have to take action if there's a requirement, the way it's established now, it is being acted upon and managed, handled more efficiently because of this pool of months that you have established. When it comes to the board, if for some reason it can't be handled through that pool of months, or there is a reason to request a waiver, and there are not a lot of reasons. I think the single subject acceleration category is one. You might have one school, maybe 2, that exceeded 2% growth a year. You're not going to have a lot of waivers, so there won't be a lot that comes to the board, I would imagine, in terms of requests for waivers to address the overage. So So the process is, again, it's part of the struggle for me with this is the law says something that's very definitive, as in you shall. The procedure in the accounting manual contemplates the time, the process, how it comes to the board. So I just want to add that so that as you think about this from the process point of view, you're not thinking, well, the law says this, but the accounting manual says that, and I've heard two different things. You have. I'm sure that was clear as mud, but
No, that's clear.
okay. Jonathan, did I do okay with that?
Perfect. Everything was great. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Now, questions, please.
Yes, Mr. Fletcher.
The 2% number, I think we have more schools who want to reach that than you might think. That's 12 kids at a 600-student school. That happens every year.
Ms. Moore, have any?
So I can tell you that we've been, one of the things that has supported us not having to allot a ton out is that we asked our schools to staff at 20. So we did not, from the get-go, let them go all the way to 23. So they had more room than you might otherwise have to continue to accept students. We seem to have allocated out to about maybe 10 schools since the second month, some MOE for class size. But some of them, I believe, are 4th and 5th grade that went up above like 33 or 34, and we needed to do something, so I need to check specifically how many were K-3. But since the reconciliation process for class size, Terry just pulled this for me just a second, like 10 seconds ago. It's, let me see.
The question may be more about
how many
what triggers the 2%.
How many schools?
And allocating, limiting class size to 20 doesn't change the number of kids who come to the building.
Right.
You still could have 2% show up, but when does that affect the unanticipated increase in students?
So
to affect state allocation.
Do we know how many schools this year?
Perhaps Rogers Lane, we believe, and perhaps White Oak might be another one. And this is typically going to be either, and Rogers Lane is sort of an anomaly, as you know, has filled up very, very fast. But the others tend to be schools that they could be new, but they're overflow schools. So sometimes if you're an overflow school, that can impact the 2%.
But I guess what I'm wondering is what the unanticipated increase actually means and when it would be calculated.
And I'm looking at both the statute and literally the accounting manual, and they don't amplify.
Okay, all right.
It says an unanticipated increase in student population of an individual school in excess of 2% of the average daily membership of that school. So that's an interpretation question that remains, at issue.
Do we have any indication, the fact that the state has even put a waiver, a growth waiver in, raises the question for me, are they tightening the ADM allocation down on anticipated growth? Are they winnowing the allocation from the state someplace else and have to allow this waiver exception? And we may not know.
But I think it's a really good point. If unanticipated can be interpreted over time, like from one year to another, it can provide some added opportunities for us to get waivers. And so it's a good point to raise and an area that we could sort of try to get a favorable interpretation. So that's at least a possibility. I'm glad you raised it.
Could you describe where special ed classes, self-contained special ed classes fit in this whole realm? The teachers apparently are funded through a different mechanism.
They're funded through a different mechanism, but they count in our individual class sizes and in our averages, and so we have not been able to get relief on that score yet. So that when we go back to the slide about when they.
So the special ed teachers allocated at 1 to 17, when we serve at 1 to 8 or 1 to 10.
Oh, do we get that allocation? So I don't think we get that allocation.
No. Our self-contained classes have a smaller class ratio. And is the question you're asking whether or not those smaller classes count in the overall calculation?
No, I'm just trying to, they're not mentioned at all in what we've seen.
This would be regular classrooms.
Okay, all right.
Not EC.
So is there an impact on EC? Okay.
They have different class sizes. This is for regular classrooms.
All right, thank you.
But the EC classes count in the averages for K-3. I mean that's
in the school-wide average.
Yeah, in the school. So there it is. That no, they don't. That's the problem.
Right.
We want them to.
Because those teachers are not in that allocation formula.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
We want them to count.
Okay. So the students don't count because the teacher funding source is different.
And the allocation is different.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll have others.
Oh, there was a good question, Phil. Other.
Did you have any other?
I did, and then I realized from the agenda that my question may get answered in one of the upcoming presentations. So
Implementation portions.
I will wait.
Okay. Thank you. Great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Absolutely.
You good with that section?
No, but
Okay. Well, yes, that was a loaded question. I'm sorry. Okay, Mr. Desiremore. This is where the complications really express themselves in trying to determine what exists in the current usage of the building, which may be different from the schematic that you could look at, because good principles make the building work for the need of the teachers and the kids. So that's why the audit was necessary. Okay.
So this is an audit of actual use, not intended use,
Yes,
not
sir.
future use?
Yes, sir.
okay.
Current use.
Current use as of last month.
Okay.
Principals were given a way to categorize the use. Principals and the area superintendent for that school. First, principals populated a document with that information, and then area superintendents went into every elementary school, walked it with the principal, show me, show me, show me.
Accurate. Very
But
accurate.
again, I'll have to qualify, it's a snapshot of last month.
Right, it's a snapshot. Okay.
Yes.
And I know how important it is to have accurate data. It will be, I promise you, it will be different next month. It may be different next month. But we have to start somewhere. And again, my view of this is like Title I data. You pick your data. There it is. After that, it goes up and down. And
Understand.
you keep taking snapshots. All right. Mr. Desirable.
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Jonathan, thank you for no facility solutions.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Again, just to kind of recap, the presentation, if you're looking online, make sure you're looking at the revised version. We did have to make a couple of corrections this morning.
Is that what you have hard copy?
Yes, hard copy.
You have hard copy is the revised version, yes. Okay. Again, the whole presentation is together here, but it will be split up into two parts. The second part coming later on, as described earlier. You all remember last summer, we established a small committee to start a review of the K-3 facility impact.
Our translators.
We had two great facility translators, correct? All right, Principals Kristen Fairclough and Aaron Marson. They have since become a popular traveling duet. Their #1 hit is attached as backup information, the presentation. You've seen most of it before. They have added a verse which is about the more recent legislation changes. But we wanted to provide that for information for you, just as a reminder. I'll also remind you we continue to work with that committee as we look through this, go through this update, and we're depending on our principals to provide us the current snapshot of their schools. Pamela Kinsley Barker, as a member of the committee, she's here today. Christina is here also today. When we last discussed this as a group, we had finalized a list of schools that would need Board of Education action to implement some class size changes, if you remember. Those actions consisted of some redistricting, some capping, and some trailer placements, along with just the schools themselves using the schools to the best of their ability. The next few slides recap some of those options used and provide you a little more detailed information that the board may be able to use for its future discussion. You'll notice that I'm going to provide this information in categories that are based on time frame, basically when the option can be implemented and be available for use at the school. As you see here, the first one is immediate. We said usually about 1 to 2 months, and that's basically if there are vacant classrooms on the campus, they can take advantage of that. And for the purpose of this discussion, whenever I say a classroom, I am including trailers on the site as part of that discussion. All right, as one of the classrooms available. Then there's the classroom conversions. And then we mentioned it a little bit, but I just wanted to touch on a little bit more. Doubling up is the term we're using, but that's 2 teachers of record in the same classroom, okay? That's some other information that we collected this time that we didn't really collect before, was the potential number of classrooms that you could exceed 20 students in and put 2 teachers in. All right? You notice that along with that immediate thing, there comes some furniture and some instructional supplies, and that cost can run anywhere from $9,000 to $27,000, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Short term, I'm calling less than 12 months. That could also be conversion of rooms in the building that were not intended for classrooms, but now are being used for classroom. So we need to do some facility modifications, depending on how big that modification is will drive your cost and the time frame. And of course, there's furniture and instructional supplies there also. Now, to dig into the furniture and instructional supplies for a minute, I just want to show you this slide. We took some time to take a look at it because for a lot of people, if you think, well, okay, I'm just going to take another classroom in the building and use it for a kindergarten class or for a first grade class, you wouldn't think that would be a big deal. There would be minimal cost. But what we wanted to try to show you here is that, for example, if you take a kindergarten, all right, and you put just 2 teachers in that room and increase the number of students in that room, doubling up, that is probably a smaller cost. There would be some incidentals, maybe a desk and some items needed for the second teacher. But if you take that same kindergarten and put it in an art or music classroom that is located on the ground floor, with ground floor access, you're going to have to totally change that room. You're going to have to change the seating. You're going to have to change the technology in the room, maybe some of the technology on the wall, power-wise. They have to have their computers for that classroom, the 1 to 3 with the cart, and their instructional materials in that classroom. So if you go into an art and music, that's pretty much a complete changeover of those rooms. Other rooms that happen to be on the same ground floor or in the same wing as kindergarten tend to be used by kindergarten anyway, so the costs tend to drop as you go into those areas. If there happens to be other classrooms that are being used by first or second grade on the ground floor, you see the cost will go back up. As you go across there, you see those costs for first, second, and third grade also. On the far right, what you see are some other items that are not costed out, just standards that are there that may not be the same in the room that's being converted. For example, flooring. Music rooms usually have carpet. However, art rooms don't. But our kindergarten classrooms tend to usually have carpet. So that would be a difference in the room. You usually have cubbies. There may not be cubbies in the room for the class to use. As I mentioned earlier, you need electrical power to serve your presentation technology. And then if you actually take art and music and move it out of a classroom, you're going to need to put it on a cart, and you're going to need to buy that cart. So that's where these costs were generated.
Clarifying questions?
Yes, clarifying. I don't quite understand on the chart. For example, it says other fourth, meaning it is currently designed for a 4th grade classroom. But if I were to convert it to a 3rd grade classroom, it would cost me $10,600. That's what
that
that
is
means,
correct.
right?
That is
And
correct.
that would be for
Instructional material.
mostly instructional materials, not, okay, I'm fine. Thank you.
Now, those are full-fledged total costs. Now, we have to acknowledge there will be some of those materials, some of these items available at the school, which the cost could drop down some.
Sure.
So my question was, furniture is obviously going to be a big cost. Some of our schools, they have varying furniture, depending whether it's a newer school or an older school. Is the furniture that we put into the art, the music, or even the mobile classroom going to reflect the furniture that you see in the other classrooms, or is it just going to be what we have in the warehouse that we can provide?
I think you may find a combination. The warehouse will take us so far, and then after that, we'll be purchasing.
Biggest issue is going to be size.
Right.
I mean, it could go as far as trading with other schools, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think that probably happens to a certain
It
extent.
does happen anyway.
All right, next. What I would call long-term, greater than 12 months. Of course, temporary classrooms would fall in there. You note there that I talk about if you relocate, that range of cost can be great, but just depending on the location you're going to. We throw in there about $50,000 to $70,000, and that, to tell you the truth, that cost is reflecting a trailer that is probably sitting over at Rock Quarry. All right. If it was at another campus, there would be additional costs because we have to fix the other campus once we remove that trailer from that campus. All right. If you purchase, of course, the price goes up higher. If you lease, it's going to be more like the relocation price. Of course, if you put more classrooms, you need the additional furniture and instructional supplies there. As you remember, we did some capping last time in order to address our immediate concerns at that point. Of course, that was more than 12 months out in advance. That has an impact on transportation. That's a cost. And then there was some redistricting. I think in the most part it was talking about reducing transfers in the past. All right, and then very long is where pretty much your capital improvement plan falls in. That's where you have the new school construction, additions, and as Jonathan said earlier, if the state decided to provide some state level funding, that would be an area that would fall into. Just to take that a little bit further about the time frame, if you'll remember when we had a presentation with you back last fall talking about the capital improvement plan, and we did some preliminary discussion about the K-3 impact and how the plan could be used to address those issues. This is just that one of those same slides, kind of a reminder. The first couple of years are pretty much fixed. Those projects are in construction, and the designs are nearing completion. And you have swing locations that are being implemented for upcoming major renovations. Years 3 and 4, you start to see some flexibility, more so at the elementary school level. But again, you have to remember that if you have issues like cash flow, you're meeting a certain cash flow, you may, if you want to add elementary schools at year 3 or so, you may be looking at moving other items back. Those other items being middle schools or high schools or major renovations may already be in progress and not available to move in that 3 or 4 year plan area. So that's why you're limited on you get some flexibility, but you're limited. And then of course, once you get out to 5, 6, and 7, you're looking at the possibility of major shifts in your plan. So current status, and if you did look at the slides by chance last night, and then there was the revised version today, this is where one of the changes were made for the tops there. Basically, this shows you that today, based on the 20-to-1 ratio that were implemented for this school year, you have 77 out of the 113 elementary schools that are over 100% utilization without counting the trailers, okay? If you count the trailers as capacity on the campus, utilization rate drops down to 44 out of 86 schools are over 100% utilization.
Should that 86 be 77?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I did not make that correction. Thank you.
That's how many places we have trailers?
No, they updated the first bullet to be 77, but didn't update the reference to it in second bullet. So out of the 77 schools, 44 are over 100% with trailers.
Thank you. As we mentioned earlier, we did go out and get a survey of how the principals are using their schools today. And based on that survey, there are 26 schools now that have multi-grade combo classes in place in order to try to handle their class size and stay within their class size requirements. There are also 11 schools that are using doubling up. They're putting 2 teachers of record in the classroom. Out of that 11, one of them has 2 classrooms that way, one has 3 classrooms that way, and another has 4 classrooms with 2 teachers in it.
Those are part of the 44, or they're part of the 77?
I'm not able to tell you. It may not be.
They got to be. I mean, if they're...
Maybe for other reasons in class size.
Mr. Fletcher, you could not be at 100% utilization and have an overage in an individual class at grade level.
That's true, yeah.
Which means?
And
these are over 100%.
Yep.
Yeah, they got to be. Okay.
well, is that true?
Well, that's...
The school could be under 100%, and if 4 kids moved into 3rd grade and you were already at the max in 3rd grade, you were under at 4th and 5th, maybe kindergarten as well, you might not be at 100% utilization.
Yeah, the 100% is the total school capacity, not grade level.
I'm trying to parse out
Why they would do it.
the rationality of the math from the reality of needing additional classrooms.
This particular piece of information is to let you know how many schools currently are doubling up. And I would view that as independent of the 100% utilization.
Independent of space available?
Potentially, yes, sir. If they're preserving certain classroom spaces to be used for another use.
So there are teachers.
So instead of
Okay.
Maybe I'm not explaining this well.
No, you are.
Yeah.
Well, we can go on, and it's a small part of the total presentation.
But your point is important. It is very important. And again, this thing is very complex. And our goal is to give you information that will educate, inform, and help you with a final decision without giving you too much information.
Well, the combo class is a reflection of having more children than your teacher allocation for a particular grade level and open seats in an adjacent grade level.
It is an organizational strategy to address an overage.
The 2 teachers in a single classroom, however, I don't know would be a strategy that any principal would deploy unless they had to.
I would disagree.
Really?
Yes, because I've talked to some that are very excited about it and that they are getting really good results in those, even with larger, and are very enthusiastic about that as a solution. Again, it goes back to who are the 2 teachers that are working.
There's got to be a lot of variables in that, too, in terms of class, how big is the physical space.
Sure, right, yeah.
And that's part of the consideration. Again, not trying to give you too much information, but one of the things that was audited were spaces in the building that had egress, a strobe, and at least 450 450 square feet.
Right, so small spaces
Small
compared
space
to
is not
standard.
being used. So again, all of that factors in, and there are going to be many different scenarios that principals are looking at. They may not want to give up that small space. They may not want to give up their teacher rooms. They may not want to give up their computer lab if they have. I mean, that's how principals are utilizing the space to meet the needs of the kids in the program, which could impact this.
Okay.
And so the difficulty is, in some cases, explaining this with the math, exactly as you're thinking about it.
I would have thought similar to what Mr. Fletcher said, because when you read it, it says 11 of the schools, so that puts me back to where we started. Just the way it's written puts me back to thinking these 11 are part of the 77.
I believe they're part of the
113 is the way it is
11
intended.
of our schools.
We can find that answer for you.
Again, from the data point of view, the takeaway here is we've got 11 schools that are doubling up.
That's right.
So the first bullet should be, we looked at 113 schools.
Yeah, and 77 of them are over 100 utilization.
Of the 113, 26 did this.
Exactly.
Okay, all right.
The whole thing is the 113.
So it's all a reference to 113.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you say 44 of the 77 schools, isn't that still 44 of 113 are over 100? Yep.
Yes.
So we just look at the whole of the 113?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Can we move on?
Yeah.
And thank you.
I just like these big
Yeah,
numbers.
this is your first pass. I'm sure you have a lot of questions.
We're doing clarify.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
35 of the 113 schools have converted rooms that were not originally classrooms. Example, storage, conference rooms. As you remember when you toured Fuller,
Yes.
storage room there, as an example. That totaled 81 classrooms at the 35 schools. All right, you're going to love this one. When you look at the capacity model, you remember that we had classrooms that had count towards capacity and classrooms that do not. Okay? I want to mention right here now that since legislation is defining the term enhancement, we're going to have to change our use of it because it was not the same. So for the purposes of going forward, we'll be talking about regular, K-5 regular classrooms are the ones that count towards capacity. And then non-regular classrooms are the classrooms that do not count towards capacity. We used to call all of those enhancement classrooms, okay? But there is a difference between the legislation and what we show. In a way to try to determine how many rooms are already being converted out there of the non-capacity classrooms, they're being converted into capacity classrooms. We looked at the capacity model, and system-wide average for resource classrooms like CCR, et cetera, should be just a little over 3, but when we've got the survey in, it was 2. So one of those classrooms, enough of them throughout the system, has reduced the average down to 2. They're being used, in a lot of cases, probably mostly for the 20-to-1 ratio, implementing that. Okay? If you look at the general ed classrooms, which you see as an example there, that should have averaged about 4, just under 4 for the entire system. It's averaging around 2.5. So they are taking those classrooms and using them for other purposes, most likely the 20-to-1 ratio implementation.
So, yeah, so just to clarify, because these are averages, we could have some schools with no CCR classroom.
You could potentially have that, yes.
Well, not with no CCR classroom, but they have
Or
taken
space.
their CCR classrooms
Yes.
and converted them and
Right.
put CCR
Somewhere else, yes.
Okay.
Storage right now.
Right?
So you got 113, and then you got 150% of 113 already converted. You lost 1.5 classroom over 113 schools. Okay. So you lost 200 classrooms there. You've already converted 113 on the CCR redeployment.
You have to keep in mind that some principals may be using those rooms for other things that they felt are important in the classroom, as Dr. Burns has mentioned before. But this was one way for us to try to show you what the current status was looking like. The other item, since last year to this year to implement the 20, we have now taken 104 vacant trailers that were already on the existing school sites and put them back into service. Okay? And if you remember, when we looked at this before, we showed you that there was going to be some trailers we would need to move at the limited locations where we've got room, because the assumption that everybody has agreed to from the start was that we would not put trailers on program space, only on non-program space. There are 15 additional trailers that are in the process of being relocated to 4 schools. All right, let's take a look at what the impact, what we project the impact to be for next year. Just a reminder, this data is based on projected K-5 enrollment for next year, with projections on how that enrollment would be distributed throughout the county. And for illustrative purposes, we're assuming total implementation of this next year. In other words, we're going all the way down to 18, 16, 17, 17, all right, in order to present this information for you. Understanding that the fact that that is now allowed to be spread out over 4 years. So, to calculate the classrooms needed and the number of teachers needed, we took the projections, we divided them by the new class size, and here's the point I want to make sure it's clear, that if that division ended up being greater than X.1, in other words, 4.1 teachers needed, that was rounded up to 5, all right, to make strict adherence to meeting 18, 16, 17, 17. With doing that, the number of K-5 regular classrooms needed in the system would be 4,030. Per the principal survey that we received on how they're using the schools today, they have 3,632 K-5 classrooms. And just a reminder, trailers are included in all these counts. It appears, based on these projections, 15 out of the 113 elementary schools will not need to convert any classrooms or need to find additional classrooms or add additional classrooms. In fact, those 15 will actually have 40 available classrooms for future growth. Those could be a combination of permanent and trailers. But they're at that school, so they're not available for the other schools.
That's vacant seats.
Multi-track, just to remind, just to make sure, verify, multi-track has been considered in all these numbers. The ground level access for K1 that's required has been verified in all these. If you use the projections for next year, you now see that 86 out of 113 elementary schools will be over 100% without trailers, and 58 out of the 113 schools will be over 100 utilization with trailers. Again, every school was audited by the area superintendents. Again, I'll just like to publicly say thank you to them and all the principals that took all that time. And we asked them to do it very quickly. And we appreciate that. Considering all this, if you look at the projections, we're looking at a need of 438 additional classrooms. With that ends the first part of this.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. Did we get all of our questions, or I mean, we'll mostly ask for clarify, but because there is a next part if you're ready. Mr. Fletcher.
438 additional classrooms which would also be 438 additional certified K-3 teachers. Okay, I think we get that in the conversation later. And I assume that we'll have some more information about where these empty classrooms are in terms of geography.
We will.
We'll get more.
Yes, and again, the goal here is to give you the 50,000 foot view so that you've got a frame, and we'll have to keep coming closer and closer to the ground.
I understand.
Are we in a parachute?
And also remember that that's the net number of additional classrooms you need. That is not the total additional classrooms
That's
that we're...
net including construction that's underway?
It's as of next year, and no.
So it does not include an elementary school that would open in 3 years?
That's correct.
So we're applying the 4-year out requirements to next year's capacity and coming up with these numbers.
Correct.
This is all based on next year.
So there's another bracket of potential classrooms available between now and the time
You are correct.
the total impact reaches us.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is this based on this is based on what student enrollment?
The projected enrollment for this coming school year.
For this coming school
Okay,
year.
it does not include the enrollment for 4 years out.
Yeah, that's important.
Good. All right, I'll turn it over to the next group.
You've got a break scheduled next. Would you like to take that as we transition?
I think so. Since we're 10:20, I think we should.
All right, thank you.
Good job.
It was right.
We heard it?
No, I've been
They're all
watching
on
Twitter.
that line.
next layer of complexity to this puzzle that we're exploring. You heard from Mr. Blumberg on House Bill 90 and its requirements and implications, and then with Joe on our current facilities and what a projected snapshot of what things might look like with House Bill 90 implemented. So the next logical progression is to share with you what it means from a teacher allotment perspective and also from a recruiting and staffing perspective. Mr. Blumberg mentioned that House Bill 90 does provide for additional funding for enhancement teachers over the next 4 years. We estimate that for 18-19 we'll receive about $6 million additional dollars state funding and a similar amount for each of the next subsequent 3 years. So over that 4-year period, about $24 million of additional state funding for enhancement teachers. Recurring. I will mention, and we'll get into more detail about this afternoon when we talk about the budget, that's got local funding implications as well, however, for the teacher salary supplement that's locally funded as well as local benefits. So stay tuned for that this afternoon. Before I turn it over to Terry and then Jackie and Marcy, let me give you a couple things to think about as a backdrop. Historically, we have in Wake County allotted our resources to schools to enhance the support of classroom teachers outside of state formulas. I'm not going to get into the details, Terry will, but again, we haven't strictly followed the state funding formulas. We've gone beyond and we've taken our flexibility to go beyond just classroom teachers. IRTs be one example. With the changes that House Bill 90 brings us, we have to rethink that. And again, Terry's going to go through a couple examples, alternative options for how we manage through that. And then as a backdrop to the staffing side, every year we face significant recruiting challenges. In the spring and early summer, we recruit about 2,000 teachers a year. That's for turnover, that's for growth, and then we add one more category for this year, the additional teachers that we'll need for the additional state funding. And that $6 million turns into just under 100, 90-some teaching positions? So if you compare the 90 teaching positions to an annual recruitment in the spring and summer of 2000, it's not significant, but then you multiply that statewide, every other district is going to be competing for those additional teachers as well. And again, you'll hear more from Marcy and Jackie on that, but that's a challenge we're going to have to face. And with that, I'll turn it over to Terry, and Terry's going to begin with one additional implication that House Bill 90 brings us, and it's up on your screen. Terry.
Okay. I put handouts at each of your seats during the break. On the first page, some of the information is what Jonathan already reviewed with you this morning. But if you'll look in the 2 paragraphs below the chart, House Bill 90 also begins to restrict the use of our allotments for classroom teacher from the state. So starting in the first year, so effective July 1, 2018, as we start to receive program enhancement positions from the state, and they will be in a separate funding source from the regular classroom teachers, those teachers must be used for program enhancement teachers. If we don't use them for program enhancement teachers, the only option is to convert them for regular classroom teacher, but for no other use. So a school could not convert them to use for a different type of position, for an assistant principal or for clerical support or for teaching assistants. That would not be allowed. House Bill 90 also says by the 4th year, so effective July 1, 2021, there can be no transfers out of the classroom teacher category. So at that point, we would be at the state formula, and it's K-12 in this regard for the restriction of the transfers. Schools would not be able to transfer any of their classroom teacher positions for regular education for another use. as a district, we got to decide if we want to go ahead and put that restriction in place earlier, if the intent is that we are getting our classes to the correct size by that 4th year. It may be that we don't want to wait till that 4th year to apply that restriction. And that's something that Dr. Burns is working through with the team to figure out.
And I'll share one example of that. It's not uncommon for our middle schools to convert some months of employment so they can have an additional assistant principal. And I'd say it's perhaps common.
Well, the middle schools were hit hardest by the change in the AP formula a few years back when we had to make some reductions. And so they've had the flexibility to convert some ADM to try to gain a 3rd assistant principal. That's what we're talking about. Very few schools, they're not earning more than 2. They'd like to have a 3rd one, the larger schools in particular, because of the sizes of grades. That restriction, if we implement this now, they would no longer be able to convert any ADM to create that 3rd AP.
And so you'll hear about that again when we talk about budget this afternoon.
Okay. So there's several options, and we've shown 2 today, 2 examples of what we might do to go from where we are today to comply with House Bill 90 and be in compliance by the 4th year. So if you'll turn to the 2nd page of your handout, this shows you in 2017-18, and here we're looking at elementary only at this time, although the impacts of this House bill affect K-12. Today we're focusing on elementary. So if you look at 2017-18, we currently allot the teachers to our schools at a ratio of 1 to 20 in K-3 and 1 to 24.27 or 1 to 26.27 in grades 4 and 5, depending on the calendar. By 2021, we need to be allotting at the state formula, which is the 1 to 18 for kindergarten, 16 for 1st grade, 17 for 2nd and 3rd grade, and 24 for grades 4 and 5, because by that time we would have received all of our program enhancement allotment from the state in a separate category. So this particular option would be look at where we need to be by that 4th year, divide the implementation by 4, and start phasing in the change to our classroom teacher formula beginning this next year, July 1, 2018. Although the state is not changing the requirement in 2018-19, we might want to go ahead and start changing our classroom teacher formula so that we are utilizing the program enhancement teachers and backfilling with a formula change for K-3. So for example, in this scenario, in the blue in the middle of the page, we would expect to get 95 program enhancement teachers each year, or 953 months. So that's 95 new positions from the state. We would move some of our existing program enhancement teachers into those positions to utilize them. That frees up classroom teacher spots that those program enhancement teachers were in.
Right.
So in this scenario, we would go ahead and start using those. So in 2018-19, we would change our formula that we use to allot resources to schools from 1 to 20 to 1 to 19.5 at kindergarten. Grade 1, we would reduce it from 20 to 19. Grades 2 to 3 from 20 to 19.25. And at grades 4 and 5, each of those formulas would change slightly also, as shown. If we change the formulas in that manner and then calculate it at those ratios, we would need in 2018-19 102 teachers for a regular classroom. 95 spots would have been freed up by those teachers going to the program enhancement allotment. So we would need an additional 7 teachers that are locally funded. So you'll see here that the cost to local, which we'll talk about more this afternoon, but for those 95 program enhancement teachers, we would need $753,000 to pay for the supplement and dental insurance for those teachers. And that's the lowest possible cost because we've calculated at an entry-level teacher, just as an example. We would also, if we choose to move our formulas, like we've shown in the example, we would need an additional 7 local funded teachers at a cost of $389,000 for the total cost for those 7 teachers. So the total local cost that first year would be $1.1 million. Then as we move through the progression to get to 2021-22, we keep changing the formula slightly each year so that by the end, we would be in compliance with the House Bill 90 provisions. So over time, in the 4 years, we would receive, we estimate 380 program enhancement teachers. We would need, by doing this scenario, an additional 112 locally funded teachers. And the cost would be to local over that 4-year period in the $9 million range.
You lost me at the 112 positions.
In the orange area, as we change our formulas to become in compliance, we would need some additionally locally funded teachers beyond what would be freed up by our teachers moving into the program enhancement.
So the 50 is
that's just
that year.
That year.
Okay,
It's not
all right,
cumulative.
I got you. Okay,
It's not cumulative. The reason that we need additional local teachers, that this isn't just an easy, we get 95, we move somebody over and it frees up.
I got you. I just didn't.
Right, but we've been allotting at a more aggressive formula than the state. So the state is allotting at, I think, 1 to 191 position per 191 students for the program enhancement. We have been allotting to our schools and continue to allot at 1 teacher to about 143 students for program enhancement, including IRTs, which may fall out of this mix. That's why some of this displaces to local, that our formula has been more aggressive in that regard for those type positions.
At the full phase-in under this scenario, in the blue section again, be just over $3 million that would be required for the supplement and locally funded benefits for the state-funded positions. And then it'd be 111 total teaching positions. And the cost of that would be $6.4 million. So if you add those two together, you get the $9.5 million.
These calculations are based on current year, 2017-18 Day 10 student membership, so there is no growth built into this. This is just using this year's data and calculating forward. You have questions on this scenario before I show you another one? Yeah.
I want you to say that again about we currently allot 1 to 143 for enhancement teachers.
Yes.
Plus.
Okay. We have a formula. It's essentially 10 months of employment per 14.32, I think it is, for program enhancement.
Is that same formula applied in here?
It assumes we are not, this scenario assumes we are not changing that formula.
Not changing the 1 to 143. Okay. And does this include where we make decisions that, for example, a small school ends up with less, doesn't end up with 100% art, music, PE only, based on the formula 80%?
Our formula for academics base allotments for small schools so that they have the core classes needed.
Is that included in here?
It assumes we do not change that. So it would assume that stays.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we also have a small amount of months that we use for that, and that assumes in this scenario that that does not change.
Okay.
So instructional resource teachers can be an issue in this because they are not classroom teachers or program enhancement. So as we're concentrating on this particular issue today, but as we look at other options later with the budget on K-12, what it's looking like is that our instructional resource teachers will need to become locally funded by the end of this. And they are experienced teachers. They're further along on the pay scale. So other situations with this is that by the end, we will likely need to have our instructional resource teachers on local funding, not being paid through the state position allotment. And that can be a higher cost because of their experience and where they fall on the pay scale.
Before you've been able to change those around?
We did historically, but not so much anymore. Right. Because with the changes to legislation and the restrictions from the state on how we can convert between program areas, in the current year, we're paying our classroom teachers and our program enhancement teachers from state funding, regardless of their experience level.
Okay.
So, and that's how the state's monitoring our data and looking to see how we're using those resources. So we have those on state funding.
But prior to this year, yes.
Prior to this year, we didn't.
Okay, good to know.
143.
So this is one scenario. So it kind of methodically moves there over the 4-year period. Just to give you another option, if you'll turn to the next page.
Before you do,
Yes.
Kathy, what's the implication for a principal having this incremental change in terms of how you organize your school? Does it matter if you got to 1 to 18 allocation next year as opposed to?
Well, each year you're ending up with more months of employment, correct?
Right.
So that's an advantage. But if you lose your IRT completely, that's a stressor on the whole system.
Okay.
Well, I also need to mention, if you'll look at this first example still, in grades K-3, the formula is becoming better as we move toward the last year. In grades 4 and 5, we're allotting at 1 to 20. It still is, but we're moving it. It's not as much of a change.
It's not much of a change.
And at 4 or 5 for the multi-track year-round, we're really close to that formula already. So
the difference to a school between .27 and .20, is that really seen by the school? It may balance the systems books.
yeah, it's probably not much of a change. Once we apply it to the membership, it depends on how it calculates out, but it's very small.
3 or 4 months, maybe. Okay.
So this was just doing it as a 25% change each year.
Okay.
The second scenario, the state is not changing the requirements for the class size maximums for 18-19. So another option is we'll get 95 program enhancement teachers next year from the state. We move some of our program enhancement teachers into that allocation, which then frees up 95 months of teacher. We could not change our formula, and we could free up local resources by moving some other teachers to use those 95 positions for that year, and we would have a local savings that first year. Then as we move to 1920, in this example, we would use a denominator of 19 for K3. In 2021, 18 for K3, and 21-22 goes to the 18-16, 17-17. Those are those class size requirements that Jonathan reviewed that are in this chart each year. Right. So it's following that methodology. But that looks a little odd because we would then have savings the first year, then a cost, savings in 2021, and a cost in 21-22. The net result in the end is the same. This just shows that you'd have a very large increase in costs that fourth year. And we would not have been moving toward it in that fashion. So this is another way of looking at it.
Term this perhaps the kick the can just a bit down the road option.
Yeah.
With a balloon payment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
This is interesting. Yeah. This is interesting.
And the local impact is the same regardless of which model?
In the end, yes.
Yes.
So what's better for the turnaround time for principals right now? I mean, we have to look at what we can do by next year in our schools.
You mean money-wise or
No.
position-wise?
Position. I mean, can we make 1 to 19.5 work? There's no, I don't know what kind of classroom space that would hit us with. No, I'm just thinking
we have to get to the end goal. Is
well, I do know that,
right?
but I'm saying like in the short term for classroom space.
If I could, this is hard for me to do, to separate teachers and allotment from space.
I know. We're
They do go together. I mean, you have to think about them at some point. In terms of either of these scenarios, the question is asked about the impact year over year. It is incremental. It might not be very large in the school. It is the balance of books that the district. And so what is being shared is two possibilities. One is incremental, fourth, leading up to the final refinement. The other is nothing next year, hold fast, and then implement over 3 years. So one is a 4-year implementation, the other is a 3-year implementation. What can be done for next year? Allotments typically go out this month. And that's one of the reasons we're pushing this where we are. I don't know that allotment changes would be significant if there's the 4-year implementation. There would be some impact. I don't know how significant it would be.
And I guess I would add that regardless of when the change takes place, it's going to take place and we're going to have to manage through it.
Well, I'm not trying to put the change off at all because I know I'm lucky. We're lucky to have 4 years, I think. But I'm just trying to figure out in a short turnaround. I know we're looking at teacher allotments, but it does, picking a scenario will be impacted by what kind of turnaround of space we have.
Right. And we're not asking you to solve the problem today. Just want to hear your thoughts about this as we go forward. And yes, that's a great question. What's the impact going to be on next year if the recommendation is to start it next year? That's a great question.
I mean, we were 2-3 months ago, we were looking at having to do this big, heavy lift now. And then with House Bill 90 passing, we've got time. I think just looking at the what we need, what we're asking, I would like to avoid the kick the can balloon payment scenario. I think, none of it's good, but I think it's to go in 2021 and say, hey, we need $10.5 million for this. Well, then you know that it's coming.
I would agree. My rough calculations on the difference between year 1 and 2 for a traditional 4th and 5th grade would be about 3 months of employment for that allocation. Somewhere around there, assuming 125 kids in 4 and 5. And 3 months is not a lot, but it could help as we're dealing with the smaller class sizes in the building, or the larger class sizes at 4 or 5 that we'll have in the building because of space crunches.
When we apply the formula for schools, because it's easier to have a whole or no position, we apply an integer, so it would round to either the school gets a position or does not. So it wouldn't be in a 3-month increment. We're looking at 100, basically in that first year, it would be 102 positions over all our elementary schools. So not every school would get a position.
All right, so in this scenario, the school I looked at wouldn't get a position until the 3rd year, until they got to 25.14, then it would be over. It would round up to another full position. Okay. So I would rather do the incremental, and I think a lot of reasons we're showing the public where we're going to have to go. We're making the changes that we can make now, and clearly telling staff what we've got to do in terms of recruitment and onboarding an extra 100 teachers a year. So I think it would be positive. There may be other scenarios, but I think this would be positive for our elementary school communities to know that, okay, this is what it means in spite of what political talk you may have heard, this is how it's going to impact your school.
And if I could, for a moment, ask you to focus on the clarifying questions, because after we go through the staffing piece, we're going to go back through the facility space piece, this piece, to get you to continue the conversation about what your preferences are. If you're doing that, that's great. But I'm wondering if we can be sure we got all the clarifying questions, and we can move to staffing, and that is the next part after the first chunk of those 3 data presentations. And then we go to what you just started doing with this, which is exactly what I appreciate. So are there other clarifying questions about the 2 scenarios that are presented?
Just this one, the teacher allocation is separate and apart at 4-5 from how big the classrooms really are.
This is not
So
anything
you might still have 35 kids in a 5th grade classroom, even though we're allocating at 1 to 26.27. Now, there is nothing that we know of at this moment that's going to restrict class size at 21, 22. Or is there? There's nothing for 4-5 that we know of today that would require class sizes to be at the allocation. Okay. Thank you.
Do we restrict it at all? We have nothing that we don't have a map.
No, we provide restrictions by how we allocate personnel.
And the other piece of this, regardless of which phase-in is going to ultimately be used, if an individual class exceeds the requirement and requires an additional allotment, that's the other scenario for K-3. This is the base allotment. And then in January, 5 second graders show up, and now you have to reorganize and or figure out how you're going to deal with that additional number of students. That would rest on top of this for the remainder of that year.
So, and if we need to add another K-3 teacher after the 20 days, that comes out of local. That doesn't come, we don't get state funding for that teacher.
What we did this year, we could apply for a waiver. But what we did this year is we reserved some money. You reserved some money in fund balance at the end of the year because we knew likely we would need it for additional teachers. And then that was appropriated by the board, so it was about $2 million. And as we've had to release those resources to schools this year, we've been using that allocation. So that's one way, and also applying for a waiver.
And then you mentioned that the RRTs would need to completely move to local funding. Is that reflected in what we see here? The next time we see this, can we get those kind of like the additional impacts in there, just so we have the dollar amounts?
Yes, and those are other budget issues. Because, another issue is do we need to adjust our formula for program enhancement, which is at the 1 to 143.2, including IRTs? Do we need to migrate to the state formula of 1 to 192? That's another issue. Or do we just assume those differences locally? And part of that is those experienced IRTs moving to local with some of the other program enhancement.
What did you say our IRT formula is?
Schools either earn a half position, which would be either 5 months at a traditional or 6 months at a multi-track year-round, as part of their academics allotment, okay, which is our program enhancement plus IRT.
That's the funding that needs to move to local time.
But that 5 or 6 month position is part of our 1 to 143.2 formula.
Right. Okay.
What the legislation says on grades 4 through 12, it specifically says local school administrative units shall have the maximum flexibility to use a lot of teacher positions to maximize student achievement. So they don't put any restrictions there. That's the language of the legislation.
Until they change it.
But factually, if we went to the state allotment of 1 to 91, the end result would be less enhancement teachers. Yes. Which, looking at the school level, if you have a very large school that now gets less enhancement teachers, but you're trying to provide every child an experience with art, music, PE every week plus a couple more that you dream up to give 5 days of what we call specials, right? Then your teachers get your planning. So it's all tied together. So we would have less to work with if we went to the 191. That's the only clarifier. Okay.
Are there other questions, or can we move to staffing and recruitment? Okay. Thank you, Kristen.
Even when I opened it,
Where are we? At the top.
Assembly.
Oh, I see. It's still
Yeah, that is. That's why I actually have my computer out.
Okay, Mr.
Well, and I'm going to turn it straight over to Marcy and Jackie. Again, they're going to give you some background information on what recruiting in a typical year looks like, and then put on top of that the implications of House Bill 90.
So after hearing, first, good morning again. So after hearing all the information about HB 90, we wanted to, in the Human Resource Office, to kind of give you a picture of of our hiring and our vacancy activities throughout the past 3 years. So as you see, we pulled our 2017-2018 district vacancy information for all schools, how many vacancies we had on the opening day, and then again on day 40. And then we'll pull it for elementary just to show that the impact or the potential impact of the K-3 class size law. So I will have Marcy also speak on this, but I thought this was a good depiction of looking at on elementary at our elementary schools. On day 1 we had 37 vacancies. On day 40 we had 31 vacancies.
So last year, as part of legislation, the reason we're giving you day 40, it was put in legislation that districts have to provide that report. That is one reason we have the detail for day 40 broken down by classroom, enrichment, and other. And one reason we don't have it for opening days because we were not collecting the data that way when our schools opened. But 98 was the number that we had total for all schools. Day 40, of course, was 62. And by comparison, they may not be the same vacancies because we had people who started the year and then left us. So that was, and then we also had additional positions that were added as part of the reconciliation process for allotments for schools that had grown. So we had some changes there as well. So we have put in place a mechanism for the upcoming year to begin tracking this on day 1 for all schools so we can start to bring back data each year similarly. Any questions about the vacancy data?
Well, to put that in perspective, if I could, just out of about 10,000 positions.
Yes.
Yeah, so does a 37 number opening day mean that we had 37 unorganized classes? So we had organized classes with something other than a certified teacher in charge.
And very well still could have been a certified if we had a sub in place with the license.
I mean, and not a full-time dedicated to that group of children.
That is correct.
Okay, so it's not an organizational impact of the open position. It is a continuity of instruction, et cetera, impact. Okay.
Exactly. So having experience with this as a parent, our introduction to Wake County was we had more students come than expected, and so some students were put into an experienced teacher's class. So the experienced teacher had a group of students for about 2 weeks while the principal hired, and then all of those students came together. So they were spread out throughout the kindergarten classes, and they came together for their kindergarten class. Is that something that we're still able to do? Because looking back, I appreciated the fact that they were with a dedicated classroom teacher who wasn't a substitute, And I think that helped with the transition. Whereas if you would have just put 20 kids with a sub, depending on their experience, could have been fine, could have been not so much. So is that something we're still able to do for when schools experience?
How could we if we had them?
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I'm trying to figure that out too.
Well, we're within the first 60 days of school, first 40 days of school.
Yeah.
You have that flexibility, again, as long as the district average isn't exceeded for the requirement. And in thinking about, again, the time, not to go back too far, but the time from the moment that class exceeds the requirement until a change occurs, it is not like flipping a switch. It does take time. And I'm sure the district, if you haven't talked about this, I'm sure that this is how the thinking will go, is that educationally, what's in the best interest of kids is to, if you have to move them to a classroom that will be permanent with a permanent teacher rather than reorganize, put a sub in there, and wait until that person comes. And principals think that way. And so the law says at no time, but in fact, there is time. And not to birdwalk too much, but Wake County is so fortunate that you have a pretty strong candidate pool. Other districts do not have any candidates.
Right.
None. And so they have to wait and wait and wait and are not in compliance. So in educational practice, I feel comfortable that our principals are doing what is best for kids. And they may not know it, but there is some time built into the requirement to allow them to do what's best for kids.
One of the anecdotes out of the pre-HB 90 action from Rowan County, for example, they had 40 positions they hadn't been able to fill all year. And that's going to be repeated in a lot of other counties.
And I'm going to speak for you. I believe that you would want principals to act in the best interest of children. And if it means waiting and not putting a sub in that class until, if ever, you would want what's best for the kids. And we would have to figure it out. Central Services would have to figure out how to support whatever needs to happen.
Looking at the numbers and in light of our discussions yesterday, so the 30-ish even at day 40 at the elementary schools means that that's basically 1 1/3 of our elementary schools if it were evenly distributed. We were talking about distributions yesterday. Is there anything, how randomly distributed, I guess, is my question. Is it 1 for 1/3 of our schools? Do we have any clusters at some schools? Or do we have any geographic areas where we seem to have more trouble than others?
We haven't pulled that specific data, but it is data that we can pull. We can actually go back and pull where those 31 vacancies exist. And I also just want for the good of the group to know that some of those vacancies at the start of the school could have been in the queue, as in they were just going through the orientation process, et cetera.
Which is why I looked at the 40-day number more than the start, right? Because 40-day, presumably, that would have been through the queue. But the 40-day, we still had 30 elementary schools, which is still roughly 1/3 of our elementary schools.
Well, there are 12 K-5 classrooms with a vacancy on day 40.
Out of 100
yes.
schools.
Okay, I was just looking at the elementary only. So yeah, okay. 12 K-5. We have the Richmond and other 15. Yeah. Okay. But even still, it's the same question. Is even or distributed?
The next activity that we want you to, or we want to highlight for you, is the teaching activity across several years. So if you kind of look at 2014-15, the teacher hiring activity, as you can see, elementary, we hired 899 teachers. Again, 15-16, 857. 16-17, 718. 17-18, our current year, 833. And we show you this to kind of illustrate, as Dr. Burns said, we have a significant pool. Unlike many districts, we have a significant pool of teachers. And so again, sometimes those vacancies we can't predict that occur, but it's not an absence of a teacher candidates. It's just now getting them in at those days. Marcy, would you like to add to that?
I think, and if you guys look at the numbers similar to what we do, we looked at, tried to get down to why we saw a change in 16-17, a little bit of a decline. We went back to, we actually had our teacher turnover decreased at that same time, so we retained more teachers that year. So that was part of it as well. And then, of course, we on average hire, as Mr. Nieder shared, a little over 2,000 or around 2,000 every year. So this does not include some of our student services personnel. These are classroom teachers. So we look at specific positions for you. So our student services personnel that by legal definition are classified as teachers and are in that 2,000, like our guidance counselors, social workers. That's where our numbers vary a little bit as well.
And I'll add that, and I'm not going to draw any statistical conclusions, but the turnover rate dropping was on the heels of some significant increases to the teacher pay schedule.
I'm sorry I missed the earlier presentations, but how would this number have to change to meet the class size? Because that 830-ish is going to have to jump significantly. I know you all talked about it.
With a 4-year phase-in, about 100 additional teachers.
Per year?
Per year. For elementary. And that does not include growth, just class size.
So it's what, about a 15% increase? 100 out of 800. Yeah.
So that leaves us, kind of what Dr. Martin is asking, is about our recruiting initiatives. Some past recruiting initiatives, but what are we doing now or planning to do as we move into the upcoming years when we are in full implementation or gradual implementation of the K-3 class law. And so we'll kind of talk you through some of the Wake County Public School System job fair, and we have added it as a new one simply because we did not have it last year. But in the past, it attracts 2,000 potential candidates interested solely in Wake County Public Schools. And I think that's a good point to make, because last year we went into the regional job fair, which was the first time for implementation of the regional job fair, and 13 other districts are involved in the regional one. We will be participating in the regional job fair again this year on March 24th, but it attracts 3,000 candidates. And so, and as we call them registrants, because some people come who haven't registered, but we do have on the record those number of registrants. So I'll let Marcy take it from there, as in some of the additional fairs that our HR staff attend, as well as some of our electronic or our virtual recruitment efforts.
And just a note about the regional fair. Last year it was hosted in Wake County, but again, it is 13 districts. They are the districts that are in our North Central Regional Personnel Administrators group. We are, of course, the largest, and just anecdotally, we always have the longest lines. I was at a meeting last week where we discussed this, and the group jokingly said, well, we're putting Wake in the back so that all the candidates have to run the gauntlet through every other district because they're all coming to see us. That is their perception. Some of that is reality. And they've been joking with me and our colleagues as we go to state and regional meetings that we can't have all of their teachers because they know that we've got to have 400 in the next 4 years. Their other districts are very competitive, so they're very honest with us about that. So as Ms. Ellis said, we have a very deep pool, not only from brand new folks that we're recruiting in state and out of state, but from districts surrounding us who want to come to Wake as well. We do have recruiters in our department who are on the recruitment trail, and you can see the list of universities that we are attending this year to recruit and targeting candidates in those. Another piece of recruitment, and you all have been very supportive of our international faculty and cultural exchange teachers that we recruit. They are how we staff many of our dual language. In fact, they are how we staff right now primarily our dual language programs. So we're very excited to continue to work with them, and we generally recruit primarily elementary through that program, on average 20 to 25 a year. We do have some in middle and high school that are in foreign language areas primarily, but most of them are elementary. Virtually, we have a contract with LinkedIn and have LinkedIn recruiter seats on their platform where we're actually able to post specific postings. They pick up postings for us, so they do some of the lifting for us there. And we have job campaigns that it's called a campaign where we can advertise and recruit. Our employees within Human Resources actually set up dialogue with candidates. The last campaign that we ran targeted elementary, and we had over 200 what LinkedIn calls passive job seekers. They're the people that are not actively going to our website or actively going to other websites or physically going to job fairs, but it actually contacts them on our behalf. And then we set up a dialogue with them, and we're able to get that information out to principals when they're in need of candidates for vacancies mid-year or throughout the year.
And I would like to add to that piece. This year we started, and I think the area superintendent, the one who's in, we're now pulling from LinkedIn and sending those candidate names to the area to the principals and copying area superintendents, so that it's not this process, a very tedious process sometimes of going through the applicant pool. We are just on our recruitment efforts ourselves. We're just sending that information this year versus letting principals have to find that on their own. And I think another good point to make as you lead into our early contracts as well. Last year and in previous years, we averaged about 30 early contracts, and we are still poised to offer early contracts again this year.
So two other technology tools that we use. AppleTrack is our applicant tracking system. We do, as part of the job fairs, set up applicant pools in there. So they're folders set up by level and school, so the principals have ease of access again there, so they're not having to mine all of the thousands of applicants that we get. So we do some assisting with that. And then our website communications is great about being very, very responsive and setting up a great portal for people to be able to find and access Wake County.
So for AppleTrack, because that can kind of be a very inhuman dumping ground, for lack of a better term. Is there a way for either someone in HR to kind of go in and sort through and look, or an area superintendent, if we know there are vacancies? Like if we know we had 12 classroom vacancies, is someone actively looking through those to get them filled? Because the people are there, and I've heard from a lot of folks, it's really hard to get in Wake County.
There are numerous filters on the AppleTrack, and so yes, we can do that. We have our HR administrators are trained to do it as well, but as those who were here yesterday, you also heard where it is right now selection. Principals select their teachers, so as we have that capability, but we are not utilizing it at that level of our capabilities of providing that information. And I say that because, yes, we can filter, but currently we have not been doing it to that level because oftentimes principals do prefer to pull their own candidates. Okay. I mean, you can add to that. That's it.
We do, as a request, right now that is our structure, and we reiterate to principals at every opportunity when we're with them that it is a service we do provide. So it is available to principals. We don't presume that they need our help a lot. We have been discussing ways that we can do that, and that is one thing that we do around the job fair. And that is create pools for them, folders that they can access, so that because any given principal, depending on where they are, they've shared with us that they have 400 or 500 applicants for a position. How do we weed that down? So we do offer that service to them. And when we set up the folders for the job fair, they have targeted candidates that they can look at, and they can reach out. We have some who are very proactive. They reach out ahead of time and say, come and see me at X time at the job fair. I want to meet you in person. We also help them with that process. But again, we do that on an as-needed request right now.
I would assume that kind of service would include targeting demographic characteristics of candidates and alerting principals to the availability of someone that might not currently be on their staff.
We do not collect that information as part of pre-employment.
So it's not available to you to make a selection on. Okay. And I understand the employment, I'm a green person, so you discount me because I put that in my application. Okay.
That is where
so it's an interesting conundrum of wanting to make sure that we are purposeful about diversifying.
So I get that that's our current culture, but I feel the need to say this based on all the data we saw yesterday and the comments we made. I'm asking, has HR thought about what ways we can start to align practices in HR that make sense? To Mr. Fletcher's point, that doesn't prohibit a principal from doing the work, but I don't even know about capacity in HR, but is there a way that we can say, here's your folder, because we actually have the data on your school. So here are some ways that we can help you. Or are we...
But they're also saying they don't have the information about race.
I know, that's why I'm asking. I'm asking, is that possible?
Well, Marcy said something, I'm not sure it was heard. That's why it's important as frequently as we can for principals and or HR staff to be able to be face-to-face with candidates.
I heard her. I guess I'm just asking, can we be proactive?
We can be proactive, and I do believe, I can assure you that is the direction, and those are the conversations we're having on with the senior director at the senior director level, senior directors with directors, and looking at the capacity of our senior administrators. The senior administrators are the HR who work directly with principals, the relationship building, et cetera, not on the processor end of it. And the senior administrators all are at a leadership level that they can have those kinds of conversations with looking at staffing plans, et cetera, to make those things happen. So, and even following up from yesterday, looking at match fit, again, that capability within our application system to better provide that information.
That's what I was asking.
If I could ask, this is important, but it feels a little more like a parking lot matter related to yesterday. It is important. It relates to what we're talking about.
I just clarify, or do they have capacity?
Is that okay if we make it a parking lot issue?
Sure, she answered me, but we can.
But I think there's more to it. And I'd love for Jackie to have the opportunity to do that as well.
And there's some legal issues on that.
I'm not sure this is clarifying now.
I think you should ask it anyway.
Can I have permission to ask it? Okay. Why? I'm looking at our recruiting list, and the first thing that popped up was, where's Michigan? Okay? Because there are just certain states that do a really good job, and Michigan's great because they have a 5-year plan, not a 4-year plan. So they come to you with half of their master's completed. So I've always found great candidates there. But then I look at this based on saying, why are we not recruiting around this country for historically black colleges? We want to increase them.
We, pre-Great Recession, traditionally recruited in 48 out of 50 states, including, I won't say every, but most of the major HBCUs. During the downturn, when budgets were cut significantly, when travel was frozen, that all changed, and we have not recovered.
Well, I think we can substitute some of the ones on this list. Not that they don't have good candidates, but they're within driving distance of our recruitment fair, okay, to substitute. I don't know why we're not in Atlanta at Morehouse, just because of the whole philosophy of the school. Why are we not at that? Why are we not looking in the places where they have great education programs? I think it's a priority. So I know I'm off of clarifying. Wow, if I could I just know how hard it was as a principal wanting more diversity in my school and not being able to find it.
He's going to
put it on the parking lot because I agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
So we also have a partnership and membership in AAE, which does give us connection with over 200 colleges and universities, their career centers, schools of education as well. As you know, we have a Future Teachers program that is specific to Wake County Public Schools. We will have 19 of those first candidates that will graduate in May of 2019. Our first cohort will be graduating. They've already signed contracts with us. We've done professional development with them each year. We are growing our numbers every year. And this year we have a partnership with the 5 universities through the Wake Ed Partnership. They will each be working with us for 5 additional candidates that will join the cohorts. Most of them will be sophomores, so they'll come into the pipeline more quickly than even our high school graduates for this year. So we're excited about that as well. And then we have our student teachers every year. We consider that one of our greatest recruitment tools because we work with them from the very beginning to identify them. And several of them are hired before they actually ever graduate. Our principals have already said, I've got a spot for you. As Ms. Ellis shared, we do have early contracts that we offer. Typically in the past, they have been around our highest needs, special ed, math, and science. We are exploring early contracts for teachers at other job fairs for elementary and other areas that we identify as high-performing candidates based on information and meeting them and recognizing that we need them in Wake County. We want to touch on that. We had a question around subs. And we do use our substitute pool as well. We have several licensed subs that we call on routinely to do interims and opening of school vacancies often.
And as Marcy mentioned about the substitute teaching, we just added that as when we're looking at, again, Dr. Martin's question, are we prepared for this potential 100 teachers a year? Well, one thing we are assured, we do have a significant pool of candidates in our subsystem. We pull that data. We have 746 certified elementary education substitute teachers. So at the very least, if this was just we were doing it at a windfall, we would have licensed teachers or the access to licensed teachers in Wake County's subs to put in those positions until we hire.
Priority or prioritization for substitutes. I know that for our teachers who are looking to transfer, they have the transfer period, and then we have the recruitment fairs. Is there for those, or is it there just a flag on their resume that says, I have been a sub in Wake County Public Schools?
That's a good question. I'll defer.
You just asked me that one.
So if we've got, our teacher transfer period, we've got our recruitment fairs that come in April, May. For our substitutes that are maybe there because they're looking to build those relationships, is there kind of a period for them to kind of say, hey, I've been looking, I've been subbing, I've been here, to kind of not necessarily prioritize them, but acknowledge the fact that they've been with us, to give them that.
We don't have anything specific for them. That's great feedback to take to the team and look at how we can build that into our process. They're not allowed to participate in our transfer process because that's
I understand. Yeah.
But they are permitted to attend any of the job fairs that we attend. Or that we host, or even if we, like the regional fair, they could go to the regional fair as well. But I think it is great that we can add that. They are already considered applicants in our applicant pool, and they would include that on their resume. And we encourage our principals to talk to one another if they've got great subs that they want to help. pushed to another school, or they maybe don't have a vacancy themselves, but a colleague does, we have supported that.
And we can pull data, but just anecdotally, I would say the vast majority of our substitutes are not seeking full-time employment. They're subbing to sub. But that being said, I think there is absolute merit in what you suggested, Ms. Mahaffey. And if I could kind of go back to, again, the focal point of this, while recruiting every year is a challenge, especially in some of the areas that are underrepresented, the challenge here of meeting the needs of House Bill 90 and the additional teachers, it will add a challenge. I think Dr. Martin, you said your number was 50% increase, but we feel reasonably comfortable with our efforts. We'll be able to address it quickly. It needs to be very attractive, and perhaps to the displeasure of some of our other districts in the state. Wake County and the surrounding areas, very attractive place to live in. We are fortunate to have an attractive teacher salary supplement. So again, we feel pretty good about our ability to meet the new challenge.
Do we still have a permanent sub-category of employee that get deployed to different places based on where they have a need? We abandoned that strategy?
It has not been in place in my time here.
Okay, all right.
We do have long-term subs. Somebody where we know they're going to be out for a period of time.
No, this was a strategy not unlike the 50 bus drivers that you've got without permanent routes.
No, that's not what I was speaking to.
And in our 700, how many ever substitutes? Okay, do we have a section of that says here's a list of, because most of them that's exactly what they want. They just want to control when they want to work, when they don't. Of how many are willing to do long-term sub jobs? Do we have that broken out?
A youth management system that may allow us to do that, but I'll have to ask.
I think it would be a helpful tool.
Yes.
Yes, it's kind of like Mr. Sutton's question yesterday about do we just ask people who are interested in, and we don't have that knowledge without doing exactly what you just described.
Isn't that kind of a moving target? Don't they change their opinion? Are they always?
We've spoken a little bit about the potential of assigning teachers to schools that have great needs. Would it streamline the hiring process to bring that all back central and have the teachers hired centrally instead of them having to go through so many steps? And that would also probably ease that issue of teachers picking their school. They would start right out from day one.
It's not just short of that parking lot you told me.
Well, yes, that's a great parking lot question. Let me give you something to think about. The answer is absolutely it would be more efficient. That's on this side. The other side is managing fit in the grade level in the school, and folks have different philosophies, but my philosophy is that if I'm going to hold a principal accountable for his or her school's results, then I have to give them the responsibility and authority of hiring the team. But there's a balance in this. And the answer is absolutely it would be faster. There's another side to consider as well. I think that would be a great parking lot discussion for the board at some point. To my knowledge, we've had limited central hiring and placement in my career.
Okay.
Limited. There was some.
There was some.
I was one. Bill Freitag basically placed me at Root Elementary School as a lateral entry teacher.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Freitag.
You went to a great school.
Was a former board member, principal, Carolyn
Morrison.
We good with questions?
I think we are because we are, living in the parking lot right now. So.
Thank you.
Lunchtime, madam?
Yes, it is.